Hi, this is Dan Walker coming to you from my cabin on Bear Lake, Alaska. A while back, my friend Rachel Sullivan recorded me reading the first chapter of my novel, Secondhand Summer. And I thought I would continue that to give myself a little practice in preparing to make all of my books into audiobooks. If you're looking for Secondhand Summer on the bookshelves, you're in the library or at bookstores, you're probably going to see a cover that looks like this. This is the new cover that just came out last year, but I'll be reading from the old version. The content is the same. In the first chapter, we meet the Barger family, Sam, his older brother Joe, and his father, when they're on their beach site fishing for salmon the last day of the season. And Sam's father has a heart attack, and at the end of the chapter, the family watches as his dad leaves in the station wagon to be raced to the hospital to see if he will survive. Chapter 2. Mom broke the news one Sunday in March when we were sitting at the kitchen table eating apple Betty for dessert. Joe was there, Mary, Mom, and me. Only Dad was missing, and we hadn't gotten used to that yet. "We have to move to Anchorage," said Mom. Her voice was soft but strong, and I can't think of a much harder thing she ever had to say. "You kids can stay with the Browns until school is over, but I'm going to have to go and get a job. You know, there's nothing here, no work for a woman, nothing that pays anything." The strength was suddenly gone from her voice. She looked around the cabin with her tears filling her eyes and leaking down her cheeks. "You'll never know how hard this is for me, to lose him like this. And then this too. Your father loved it here, you know." I could only think of how it felt to hug her, how she was soft on the outside and hard underneath. Dad's hugs were just hard, no softness, their strength right out front. I thought Mom could use a hug now and then, but one from me right now wouldn't help much. Joe leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Makes sense to me," he said. Of course it was fine with him. He had stayed too long already. "It'll be better, you'll see." I saw Mom's pain as she swept the hair back from her face and held the coffee cup to her lips, so the steam from it rose into her nose and eyes. She did that when she was choosing careful words. "We don't all feel that way, Joe. We don't all want to leave." "He'll be here forever," I heard myself say. "We'll be back." I don't know why I said that, like a kid would make a decision about such things, about anything. But Dad was buried on the bluff above the inlet, and the log house he built and the land he cleared, the smokehouse, all of it would be there. It wasn't going away. Mary erupted instead of speaking, as if she always wanted something to do. "Joe doesn't care about anything but himself, Mom. You know that. No one cares what I want. No one even asks me." "Now, Mary." "Daddy wouldn't want us to leave," Mary said. She turned a hard stare at the three of us around the table. "He built this place for us, and this is where we should stay." I thought Mom was going to cry again. "I want to stay too, Mary, but your father would expect us to do what we had to do to get by. He didn't like going doodle-bugging for an oil company off in the middle of nowhere all winter, but he did it to support this family, and we're going to do what we have to do." Joe was suddenly restless, and he rose to tend the fire. He opened the stove, exposing the red coals, and jabbed them with a poker, creating a shower of sparks. Then he slammed the door with a bang, pulled on Dad's wool coat, and passed through the snow porch to the cold and the silence of the winter night. It was done. The talk at the table had just been talk. As sure as there was sunrise, we were moving to Anchorage. The wind in the trees was stronger now, and I could hear the snow brushing against the windows, and I wondered if it would be winter forever. It was the darkest of winters, this winter after Dad died. The nights were endless, and the sun of the day had no warmth. The wind seemed to move moaning as it wept across the muskegs, searching for spring. During the long evenings that winter, I hid from the cold of death, and I hid from winter by reading tales of mountain men, and I studied their lives in the battered Compton's encyclopedias. I walked in the tracks of Lewis and Clark, and I slept in the camp of John Coulter. I laid beaver trap with Joe Meek, greatest of the frontiersmen. I had decided that I could be a mountain man, and I ventured out beyond the shoveled paths and into the sleeping timber. The chickadees were the only sign of light that I crossed when I went over places I'd played in the summer, and I walked taller as I passed deeper into the forest. I used to be scared of the shadowed maze of trees, but now the birches and the alders were stripped naked, and I could see deep into the woods, much farther than during the summer. Small trails ran through the trees and under the brush, and I knew the broad track and the black scat pellets of rabbit. A shadow moved and then froze. A rabbit saw me. I froze too, and our eyes locked for a moment, and I made a plan. In a shed, I found the snares hanging in a corner, tinted with rust and long forgotten. I remembered then pictures from books showing how they should be hung, and I tried to recall each detail as I separated the long pieces of wire with their tiny lassos at the end. There were 6 of them, and I stretched each full length on the rough workbench beside the coffee cans full of nails and bolts and strange mechanical parts that only a father could put to use. The shed had been Dad's quiet place, and I felt a touch of guilt for the times I interrupted that silence. "What's that do? Why is metal heavy? Will I ever be big as you?" He would nod and answer, or nod and not answer, or not answer without looking up from his work at all. I had questions now, but they went unasked as I oiled the snares like Dad would have. I could smell his Prince Albert cigarettes, and I could hear the curses he used on rusty bolts and broken engine parts. I could feel his presence among his tools. I took my snares and hung them from bushes along the narrow rabbit paths under the moose brush and through the Devil's Club where the large animals wouldn't go. Some I tied on bushes bent over spring-like and anchored them with a notched stick. Others hung loose from the branches above. Sometimes I used sticks to build a tiny fence along the trail through the snow, so that when a rabbit ran along the trail, he would follow it and run his head into the noose until it tightened around his neck and choked him. Every day I went directly from the school bus to check my trap lines. The dusk came early in the clearing, and the darkness had settled among the trees by then, making the giant spruces seem taller. I imagined sinister creatures hiding behind each tree, and on especially dark evenings, I ran the whole trail in 10 minutes, not stopping, not slowing down, just a quick glance as I passed each snare. Yes, I was afraid, but I was ashamed of that fear that sometimes grabbed me. I liked the snares, and I liked the trail. I liked the time alone. I just didn't like the woods in the dark. The great adventure stories and my daydreams about them never showed that fear. I had to wonder, were the mountain men ever afraid of what could be out in the night beyond the light of their tiny campfires? Did they ever cower under blankets, wishing they were home in bed with people around them? The woods did that to me. Every shadowed tree, every gust of wind, every frightened thrush made me jump and tremble. On one early spring evening, the winds off the inlet had filled most of the trails with snow, and I had to pick my way carefully, following the flags of plastic ribbon that marked my path through the forest. By now the days were longer, but there was little warmth in the sun, even with the light, and the air bit my cheeks. I had been trapping for weeks and caught nothing, so I was complacent, expecting nothing, only half paying attention to the snares as I passed them. And then there it was. The rabbit was dead. He lay stiff, frozen in an unfinished lunge, with my snares cinched around his neck. strangling the last of his breath. It was just a meal now, rabbit stew lying cold in the snow. I stepped back, a lump of nausea rising in my throat. My first prey was dead before me and I couldn't touch it. I had found the run and I had set the snare, but now I couldn't touch my catch. I didn't want to handle this rabbit I'd killed, but I had to. I had to be the hunter now and take possession. I leaned forward and cautiously lifted one leg. The fur was soft like a cat's, but beneath it was solid, like someone had stuffed a wooden cutout of a rabbit in real rabbit's fur. The eyes were real though, and the tiny crystal of blood frozen to the lips was real. I forgot how cold I was. The nausea was passing, and I forgot that I had lost my father. I forgot everything but the dead rabbit, and I wanted to make a fire and eat it right there. Gingerly, I took the wire in 2 fingers and lifted the head. The snare wire was buried in white fur, and traces of blood tinted it pink. I gagged a little as I loosened the noose and pulled the carcass free. The animal was heavy and long, so I had to hold my arm up as I shuffled toward the house, changing hands every few steps. I climbed over the burn pile and stopped to rest my arm. Dead things were heavy. I squatted in a small depression in the pile of stumps and brush that formed a low wall around our clearing. In the summer, this shaded place would grow fireweed and raspberries and make it private. Wild grass would form a soft bed for daydreaming boys. It was there that I had dreamed up crossing the Rockies to trap for beaver, and there that I had made detailed lists of gunpowder, salt pork, and trade beads that I would carry with me. Gazing at the sky, I could enumerate each detail of my outfit and weapons. But that was the summer. This day was real, and I passed over that dreaming place. I took the short walk across the clearing to the house. I could see the tiny hump of it squatting in the snow, a rectangular log box with a pitched roof. Out behind was the outhouse, and behind that, a dory turned over and hidden in the snow beside the smokehouse. The light in the kitchen window made a pale square of gold in the snow, and my mother's shadow passed through it. She waved when she saw me, and I held up the rabbit and saw her smile. "Don't you bring that in here," she said, catching me at the door. She smelled of homemade food and warmth, and the heat of the kitchen washed around her like surf. "My, that's a big one," she added. "I guess I know what I'm cooking tomorrow night." The darkness around her eyes reminded me of our loss, and I was filled with a sense of panic. There was no father at this house to help me clean the rabbit. Dad would have known how to butcher the animal and probably would have told me a story while he did it. "You remember how to clean them, right?" Mom said. "Yeah, no problem," I lied. I turned back to the forest, and beneath the giant spruce, I used my knife to open up the rabbit and expose the innards. They were cold, nearly frozen, and I had to tug and tear to pull the strange, slimy shapes out of the cavity that formed by the creature's ribs. I was making a mess of it, ripping meat and hide and splattering myself with blood. I knew the skin would come off in one smooth slip, like taking off one-piece long johns, but I didn't know how to do that, and there was no Dad there in that cold winter night to show me. I looked across the snow to the back edge of the clearing, where the burn pile made a shadow in the pale light of evening. I didn't feel anything like a mountain man that night. My feet were cold, and it was dark under the trees where the night started early. There were cold tears on my cheek. I knew that Dad would insist that the guts were left in the trees away from the cabin where the scavengers could get them. He would have been grouchy if I complained. Several yards into the shadowed forest, I threw the guts across the snow where they spread a shameful stain. And I walked slowly back to the house with the rabbit in my hand, and I wondered how many days I had left. I knew we couldn't stay, and soon I would have to put away my snares and say goodbye to the cabin in the woods that I was just beginning to know. As if reading my mind, Mom confirmed my fears when I returned to the house. She took the rabbit and laid it in a pan of cold water. And as she washed her hands, she leaned against the sink and smiled, the first real smile I'd seen in several weeks. "Are you proud of yourself?" she said, "bringing home dinner like a man?" "I hope I gutted it okay," I said. "It's just fine." She moved across the room, shortening the distance between us. "Sam, you'll have to pull your snares in a few days." I nodded my answer, feeling the comfort of her presence and the warmth of the fire in the wood stove. I knew she was heading to Anchorage to start a job, and it was time for us kids to be farmed out with friends until we finished the school year. Perhaps it was the purity of a sleeping forest in winter, or maybe it was just the safe, warm feeling of the cabin itself, with its memories of Dad's laugh and the taste of his cream and sugar coffee. For whatever reason, the homestead was a good place to be, especially for a guy like me. Then I knew that in this, my first time in the woods alone, long before the end of winter's shadow, I had started a new part of my life. Thank you. That's the end of chapter 2. Soon I'll record chapter 3 and put it up for your viewing.